could you just quickly give us a rundown of what was known about microdosing kind of from the early heyday of psychedelics before LSD and magic mushrooms and other substances became illegal, and kind of there was this big pause essentially hit on the research agenda?
Yeah, interesting question. So microdosing, as we think about it today, does seem to be a relatively modern phenomenon, although there are some hints of people experimenting with things similar to microdosing in the past. So I didn't completely hear your introduction, but I think you mentioned Albert Hoffman talking in an interview about taking very small doses. That was kind of something that appeared in one published conversation with him that there doesn't really seem to be much other evidence of. In the 50s and 60s, it doesn't seem like there were too many people that were taking very small doses, although in some of the early experiments that took place in those days, there were some studies that had very low doses as a control condition in studies looking at high dose psychedelics for other purposes. And so when you go back and look at some of those studies, they sort of do fit in with what we would consider microdosing today. And so there are some hints, even back in that early research, that very low doses were having some effects, although it wasn't very well understood what was going on at that stage. If you go forward then into the late 70s and early 80s, there are some hints also there of people starting to take small doses. There was a group in Berkeley that does seem to be experimenting with very low doses of LSD in the early 80s, but it didn't really catch on in popularity until probably the last 5 or 6 years, popularized a lot recently by Jim Fadiman and his work in the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. And then, yeah, as you know, there's been this kind of subsequent really intense interest in popular culture in microdosing and the possibilities that it can lead to.